Thank you for tuning in today and welcome back to another episode of The Source. I'm your host, Zain Raza. Before we begin this interview, I would like to remind you to join our alternative channels on Rumble and Telegram. YouTube, owned by Google, can shadow ban and censor us at any time. And if that day ever comes, we won't be able to reach you with our videos, let alone with an announcement. Hence, we are asking all of our viewers as a precautionary measure to join these channels today. And if you're watching our videos regularly, make sure to support our journalism with a donation. Even though we've reached millions of people this year and our channel has grown to over 160,000 subscribers, our donations have dropped over the summer period. If you want us to continue with our relentless, independent journalism that you just won't hear in the corporate media, please don't forget to donate today. To find out how you can join our alternative channels as well as how to donate, click on the description of this video below. Today I'll be talking to Israeli politician and member of the parliament, I should say a suspended member of the Israeli parliament, Dr. Ofer Cassif. Dr. Cassif is also a lecturer of philosophy and politics at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. He received his PhD in the London School of Economics. Dr. Ofer Cassif, welcome back to the show.
Thank you very much.
Let's start with your personal case before we move on to the broader picture. The last time you and I spoke, you had been suspended from the Israeli parliament for signing a public petition supporting South Africa's motion at the International Court of Justice that accuses Israel of committing genocide in Gaza. Just last month, you were handed another 2-month suspension from parliamentary activity by the Knesset Ethics Committee following complaints from fellow lawmakers as well as members of the public. Could you explain the background to this latest suspension, as well as what you believe is the objective behind these repeated attempts to bar you from political activity?
Well, first, there is a persecution going on against anyone who raises an alternative voice, anyone who tries to talk or to outcry against the continuing genocide and atrocities in Gaza, as well as the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank, which became very lately especially deadly. Anyone who tries to raise a voice against those crimes is persecuted. If we are talking about, so to speak, common citizens, that is to say, no members of the parliament with immunity, at least in theory. So many of them, have been fired from their workplaces or sacked from their studies at the university, or even been arrested. In vain, of course, simply for posts or tweets. So the general atmosphere in Israel today, alongside the crimes in the Palestinian occupied territories, there's fascism running rampant within Israel, which boils down to the point of persecuting, as I said, anyone who doesn't agree with the government, especially those who raise a voice, including, by the way, families of the Israeli hostages. They've been time and time again systematically bullied by the police, which turn into a kind of an SA, a private militia of the minister and the government, rather than giving a service to the public. That is not to say that all police officers like that, but as an institution, it turned to be like that. So my persecution as member of the Knesset, we joined, the persecution of my comrades in my fraction in Hadash Ta'al, belongs to the same family, as it were. There were attempts to impeach me last year, the beginning of 24, because things I said against the genocide, because the very usage of the term genocide, which I continue to use, because that's reality, unfortunately. I cannot alienate myself to reality simply because people don't want to hear it or want to silence me and my comrades. So there were attempts to impeach me because I've been using the term genocide, and because I joined this petition in support of South African appeal to the ICJ. And since they failed, they suspended me for the very same things for 6 months. And they tried to impeach lately my friend and comrade, the head chair of our list, Ayman Odeh, because he expressed joy over the release of the Israeli hostages as well as the Palestinian prisoners, Simply because of that, there were attempts to impeach him. So you can see with the immunity and everything, and very often is under the guise of the ethics committee of the Knesset, which is controlled by the right wing, coalition and opposition. So it's far from being, impartial or unbiased. Quite the contrary. And same now. The ethics committee decided to suspend me starting October because the Knesset is now in recess. So once it comes back to work fully, in October, I'm supposed to be suspended for 2 months. I intend to appeal to the Supreme Court. But at the moment, the decision is to suspend me. Again, because I use the terms genocide and war crimes, etc., because that's the truth. And I will continue to tell the truth, whatever the price is. And because I wrote a letter to The Hague, to the ICC this time, to ask them to investigate Prime Minister Netanyahu for genocide, because in my view, and it's not only my view, it is based on so many researchers by experts, including Jewish and Israeli ones, that argue, based on their expertise, that there is a genocide going on in Gaza, and that Netanyahu, obviously, as the head of the snake, as we say, is the main guilty. So those the reasons. This is part of the persecution. Ayman Odeh, which I mentioned before, and I were almost lynched a couple of weeks ago by a mob in a demonstration against the genocide. And that's the atmosphere in Israel. Since you are talking from Germany, and most of the viewers, I believe, are Germans, so I make the comparison to the Weimar Republic in its darkest time, when people were persecuted and often lynched by the Freikorps because of their either ethnicity, mainly Jews, of course, or because their political stances, especially communists and others too. We are in the same atmosphere now, and in some respects we are already in Germany of the 30s.
Let us now switch to the situation in and around Gaza. As of August 14, 2025, Gaza's death toll has tragically surpassed 61,700, according to many UN agencies. UN agencies also warn that famine conditions are already underway, and in July, the World Health Organization reported a sharp spike in malnutrition-related deaths, confirming that famine thresholds have now been exceeded across most of Gaza. In early August, Israel's security cabinet approved a plan to take military control of Gaza City, triggering widespread international criticism. Germany responded with a partial halt to arms export that could be used in Gaza. Just as a side note, the reporting on this has been quite dismal, and we will examine that in the next question. But for now, let's look at more of the reactions that have come out from Western leaders. Foreign ministers from Australia, Canada, France, Italy, New Zealand, Norway, and the UK joined EU High Representative Kaja Kallas in issuing a joint statement condemning the plans as likely to breach international humanitarian law. Also, Norway's largest sovereign wealth fund announced it would divest further from Israeli firms, already pulling out of 11 companies. On August 12, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, instead of stepping back, doubled down in an I-24 news interview, stating that he is on a, quote, historic and spiritual mission, unquote, and is very connected to the vision of, quote, Greater Israel, unquote, provoking sharp condemnation from Arab League and multiple Arab governments. Dr. Cassif, could you provide your assessment on Israel's plan to control Gaza City, as well as elaborate on what Netanyahu means when he talks about Greater Israel? And secondly, do you think these sanctions and reactions from the West are enough in addressing the situation in Gaza?
Well, I just want everybody to remember or to know that in an interview I gave it already in October 2023, and then I was also suspended because of that then for 45 days only, in comparison to what happened later. I already warned that the real intention behind the attack on Gaza, we are talking about the very beginning of the attack. Even I think the interview was even before the invasion, to Gaza. It was then only the bombarding from above. So I already warned that the real intention of the government was not to deliver security for the Israelis, was not to release the Israeli hostages who are tortured and dying in agony there. Let's not forget that. And it was not even a revenge against the Hamas. It was to use this opportunity that Hamas gave the Israeli government with its criminal massacre of October 7th. It used, the government of Israel has been using the massacre, the criminal massacre of October 7th as an excuse to pursue the so-called decisive plan that was presented by Smotrich already in 2017. And this plan was very clear regarding 3 points. First, that Israel must annex the all occupied Palestinian territories. Second, those, without granting basic rights, of course, to the Palestinians. That means a clear apartheid regime. The second point was that those Palestinians were not going to accept their status as second, or I would say even eighth class citizens, if you like, or subjects to be more accurate, are going to be expelled from their homeland. And third, those Palestinians who are going to resist those crimes are going to be killed. They waited for a chance to execute this genocidal plan. Actually, they tried to execute it once it was elected, the government, or once it was formed, to be more correct. And the so-called judicial reform that you probably remember the government tried to pursue before October 7, 2023, and it is, by the way, a sugar-coated term to describe a coup, a fascist coup, was actually intended to eventually realize this genocidal decisive plan. What was the real intention behind the coup? To get rid of all those factors that may stop the intention of the decisive plan. They failed because of the demonstrations, and then came October 7th, the massacre. Ever since, the government of Israel has been pursuing the very same plan, genocidal plan of Smotrich. And you can see it. It boils down to 3 different strategies. One is the genocide in Gaza. Second is the ethnic cleansing in the West Bank. Third is to make Israel proper a fascist regime. That means, to totally eliminate basic civil rights of the citizens in Israel, Arabs, Jews, and others alike. And that's exactly what we've been witnessing in the last few months. That's the real intention behind the attempts to occupy the whole Gaza Strip and to literally ethnically cleanse the Palestinians and kill them. So that's the real intention. It was there before October 7th, and it became worse in its implementation after October 7th. That's the real thing. As to the question about the international community, the international community began to react too little and too late. Much too little, and even more so too late. Because we are almost 2 years after October 7th. The death toll is probably much higher than the one we know, because now when we are talking about 61,000, of whom, by the way, almost 20,000 children, we are talking about those who were identified. There are many under the rubble, for some of them for almost 2 years. Many are going to die because of the starvation. There's no famine going on in Gaza. There is an intentional criminal starvation. And of course, dehydration and things like that are caused by the government of Israel intentionally as their policy. So the death toll, I'm afraid, is going to be much higher. Experts speculate that it's going to be more than 100,000. And of course, on top of that, those who lost so many limbs, including so many children, and those who are going to be sick and disabled physically and mentally and emotionally because of this genocide that goes on. Where was the international community thus far? I cannot refrain. I cannot. As someone who comes from a family that most of it was killed by the Nazis. I mean, on my mother's side, my both grandparents lost their entire families. They were the only ones who were not killed because they left Poland before the occupation. And so, but I cannot refrain from making a comparison between the international community reaction then and now. It was silent then, it's been silent now. I put obviously the blame for the genocide first and foremost on the Israeli government and their proxies and those who execute the execution, so to speak. But I also put a lot of the blame on the international community and different governments which been silent up till now. And so I said that is too late, but it's also too little because we are fed up with words. We need actions. And the actions must be taken against the government of Israel in a sense that the government will be hurt. Now, I'm not talking, of course, I oppose a violent reaction unless, we reach the point that there's no other choice. At the moment, I'm against any kind of a violent reaction, but I do support sanctions. Absolutely. All kinds of sanctions. And because this is, as I said in another interview recently, forgive me for quoting myself, I consider those instruments like sanctions not only as non-violent, which is because of that it's legitimate, but it is also not only for justice, which is the supreme value, justice for everyone, the Palestinians, but the Israeli hostages too. Let's not forget that they've been cynically and intentionally sacrificed by this criminal genocidal government. They've been sacrificed. I'm in touch with their families who've been suffering because of the government. That doesn't mean that, of course, Hamas and those who hold the hostages are innocent. Absolutely not, to say the least. Of course, I blame them too for torturing, for starving the hostages. But there is a deal on the table for months, for more than a year. And the government of Israel is the one that undermines any possibility of reaching a deal to release the all hostages and stop the carnage. So on top of that, I think that our struggle and my struggle, as I said, is for justice, but it is also a struggle for the soul of the Israeli society, which is dying. And I think in that sense that the international community poorly reacts.
Talking about sanctions, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz recently announced a suspension of approvals for weapons exports that could be used potentially in Gaza. The decision triggered uproar among the conservative bloc, the Christian Democratic Union, CDU, and the Christian Social Union, CSU, who accused Merz of undermining Germany's historic commitment to Israel's security. But independent media critics caution that the sanctions and the debate around it is simply theater. For example, defense contractor Renk, which supplies tank gearboxes to Israel, is already developing a plan B, relocating production elsewhere like in the US if the export ban is enforced in Germany. Furthermore, what I've been able to research so far is that Germany has simply requested Israel not to use these weapons in Gaza without any effective legal or monitoring mechanisms. That leaves full control with Israel Israel can essentially say, hey, we want these weapons for Lebanon or against the West Bank, and later divert them towards Gaza on its own accord. Can you comment on Germany's so-called partial ban? And how do you view this framing in the German media that is repeated with great frequency, that on the one hand, Germany has a historical duty to Israel given its crime of the Holocaust, and on the other hand, it has to comply with international humanitarian law?
Look, I and my comrades, Palestinians and Jews alike in my movement in Israel, we care about the security of Israel. We are not against the security of Israel. You know, they often try to frame it as if we are against the security of Israel. No, we are not. We want Israel to be secured. We support the two-state solution, and we support the right of Israel to exist as a sovereign, peaceful state. As I already said, our struggle is for justice. Justice is universal, and it, you know, and it is relevant to Israelis too. The problem is that those who support the armament, support arming Israel, they actually harm with H, rather than with only A, the interest of Israel and its security, on top, of course, harming the Palestinians. Because the main enemy of the Israelis and the state of Israel at the moment is the government of Israel. I gave the example of the Israeli hostages. They don't care. They send Israeli youngsters as soldiers as a cannon fodder to be killed in vain. What security is that? What future of Israel is that? We have to break this lie down. Those who really care for the future and the security of Israel, as I do, must do whatever they can in order to stop this crazy, fanatic government. There is a common interest to both Palestinians and Israelis, as well as the whole region and eventually the whole world, to stop the carnage. Because if it continues, so it's not only, it's first and foremost and mainly, of course, the Palestinian people who pay the price, but the Israelis too, and not only those hostages who've been sacrificed and those soldiers and those hostages who've been sacrificed. Eventually, it's the citizens of Israel as a whole and the state of Israel itself. It's not going to survive for long such a policy. And especially because under the smoke screen, there are crimes against the citizens of Israel by the government, like the persecution I mentioned before. So if someone in Germany specifically, and I endorse it, really cares for the future of the Israelis, for the security of Israel, the first thing they must do is to embrace the sanction that Chancellor Merz stated or talked about. That's our interest too. The government of Israel is against the people of Israel. Most of the people of Israel say so. Not only those who accept or agree with my views. Everybody, most of the people understands now that the government lost control. It's insane. It's led by a person who cares only about himself, Netanyahu, who cares only about his future out of prison, and by his surrounding, which consists of fanatic messianic bigots like Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, and others. They do not act for the sake of Israel and the Israelis. They act in order to realize a crazy messianic dream, which is in practice a nightmare. So you have to decide with whom you go. Are you going to join forces with the government of Israel that acts against the Israelis in addition to their atrocities against the Palestinian people? Or are you going to support the Israeli people against its own government? The Germans experienced that in the past. We all know that the government in Germany during the 30s and 40s, the beginning of the 40s, at least the first half, did not act in the interest of the German people. Exactly the opposite. Remember Sophie Schul, the White Rose underground, non-violent underground. Think about them and think you help them.
Talking about Israel's domestic situation, let's dig deeper on that. Economically, the April 2025 IMF outlook projects Israel's 2025 GDP growth at 3.2%, down from the Bank of Israel's estimate of 3.5% forecast. The IMF warns that the ongoing war is dragging down growth, eroding investor confidence, and straining fiscal stability. Politically, in July, the ultra-Orthodox parties withdrew from the coalition after Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu failed to pass the draft exemption bill, which he promised he would do so to retain their political support. Now his parliamentary majority has been severely reduced, leaving him with minimal room to govern. Militarily, while precise figures are hard to find, the Israeli media reports troubling levels of reservist burnouts and absenteeism. In addition, on August 4th, more than 600 retired security officials, including former heads of military intelligence services, signed an open letter urging the United States to press Netanyahu for a ceasefire. Meanwhile, Israeli outlets report that IDF Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir, had serious disagreements with Benjamin Netanyahu, even warning that the plan to occupy Gaza City risked draining military capacity, and despite his objections, the plan was ratified anyways. Publicly, as you've mentioned, anti-war demonstrations are swelling across major cities, and domestic media coverage is slowly becoming more and more critical of the war. As someone living in Israel, can you speak to these internal contradictions and the current public mood? And can you give us an assessment of whether you think that Israel is heading towards an imminent collapse?
I begin with the last question. As I said before, yes, I'm afraid that if it continues, Israel is going to collapse. Economically, politically, or diplomatically, if you want. Socially, especially, the Israeli society is very polarized. Violence within the Israeli society is on the rise. I mentioned before that Ayman Odeh and myself were almost lynched a few weeks ago, but that's only one example. The violence against anyone who doesn't accept or doesn't agree with the government, the violence either by the police in demonstrations or by a rightist mob, in the streets, in demonstrations, or anywhere else, let alone in the social network, everything is on the rise. So obviously, if that continues, it's going to erupt. I'm afraid that we are on the brink of a civil war. I'm pretty sure that a political assassination, perhaps assassinations in plural, is around the corner. You know that up till now, the chairperson of the president of the Knesset, as well as the coalition, apart from one, no one agreed to condemn the lynch that two members of the Knesset almost went through, Ayman and myself. They refuse to condemn it. They are legitimizing it. They've been legitimizing it. So everything together, the economy, that is not only what you mentioned, the growth and everything, unemployment, the cost of living, so many ingredients and elements. Israel economically is on the brink of collapse. So it won't happen tomorrow. Economic processes are normally taking time, but we are going, and especially the poorest ones are going to feel it quite soon. But especially socially, this polarization is going to explode into a huge amount of violence in the Israeli streets, and that's obviously going to lead to a total collapse of the Israeli society if it doesn't stop. And so I'm quite pessimistic. If we don't change it, I'm quite sure that that's going to be the end of this state. Now I want to change the state. I want to amend it. I want it to be a democratic, egalitarian one. But I don't want it to disappear. And this is exactly what the government has been doing. It leads to a total disappearance of the state. So in that sense, as I mentioned before, the government is the arch enemy of the Israelis and the Israeli society. So Yes, I'm very worried, obviously, about it. I'm afraid if we don't change it and we need the international community on our side, as I said before, yes, I'm afraid that it is imminent.
The two-stage solution remains the hallmark of Western diplomatic rhetoric. As German Foreign Minister Johann Wadephol recently emphasized, quote, recognition of a Palestinian state should come at the end of talks on a two-state solution, unquote, warning that Germany would respond to any unilateral Israeli actions. Yet, a key debate persists. Should a two-state framework emerge organically from Israel and Palestinian dialogue or enforced externally through diplomatic or legal pressure? And perhaps most importantly, where there's room left, is there any room left for such a solution? For example, over the past decades and accelerating since 2023, Israel has advanced major settlement expansions and de facto annexed large swaths of the West Bank. Most recently with a revived plan of approving thousands of homes in the E1 corridor, a move critics say will bury the idea of the Palestinian state. This raises an important question that Western leaders and major media organizations regularly ignore whenever they invoke the two-state solution rhetoric. What remains for a Palestine in a two-state map? What land, resources, and autonomy will be left given these realities? Would Palestinians be given back the lands that Israel annexed over the last decades? Can you provide your assessment on these questions and whether a two-state solution, as discussed today, is still viable or whether it has just become a diplomatic slogan?
Okay, I have to leave, by the way, in 5 minutes, so I try to be short. First of all, I begin with something which, in my view, is not realistic. It is the one-state solution. I personally and my comrades, we do not have any problem as a matter of ideology with a one-state solution. But we think that it is first unrealistic given the history of more than 100 years, given the balance of power between the Palestinians and the Israelis, which means that one state will necessarily be an apartheid state in which some people a priori has more power than the other, and also the Palestinian people are entitled to enjoy their own national self-determination and statehood. Perhaps in the future there will be, assuming there are two states, in the future later, there is of course a possibility of transforming it into a confederation, federation, one state, upon consent. But first of all, the Palestinians need their own Palestinian state in the territories Israel occupied in 1967, alongside the state of Israel. And again, if both sides, everybody who's involved, agrees later on to transform it, so be it. At the moment, it's impossible. It is possible, and it is, in my view, even easier than people may think, to dismantle the illegal settlements, and all the settlements are illegal according to the international law and to the resolutions of the United Nations. All settlements must be dismantled, and of course, once they are, and they will be, of course, there will be, a possibility of establishing a Palestinian state in the West Bank and, of course, Gaza Strip, including East Jerusalem. That's a must. And there's no other possibility. And again, the international community must put the pressure. I mean, to say that, first of all, there must be talks between the sides, and thereafter a recognition. If it wasn't so sad and tragic, I would have laughed out loud, because the Israeli governments in the last 30 years, apart from perhaps one government or two, which didn't sustain long, in the last 30 years, most of the time Netanyahu was the prime minister, and whose intention, I would say perhaps his life's project is to make everything possible to prevent the possibility of establishing a Palestinian state. That's the reason that he supported literally and practically Hamas and opposed the Palestinian Authority. He said in 2019, in his own words, that anyone who opposes a Palestinian state must support Hamas and oppose the Palestinian Authority. And that's what he did with the money that he transformed to Hamas in Gaza. So, what talks are we talking about? What are you expecting? A prime minister that for 30 years and throughout his adult life made the prevention of Palestinian state a life's project, a life's task. There must be pressure. And again, that's the interest of both the Palestinian and the Israeli peoples.
Dr. Ofer Cassif, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you. All the best. Have a nice day.
And thank you for tuning in today. Before you leave, don't forget to click on the subscribe button below. It takes you no time and costs you nothing. And don't forget to support our journalism, which does not take any money from corporations, governments, all with the goal of providing you with the information that you just won't hear in the corporate media. I thank you for your support and for tuning in. I'm your host, Zain Raza. See you next time.